We've looked at some all-star forgers. Now let's take a look at some also-rans. I'm going to show you here a painting by Canaletto, also known as Antonio Canal, who worked in Venice in the end of the Renaissance, sometime around the 17th century. And he was known very much for painting landscapes, cityscapes of Venice, in particular the buildings that tourists on the Grand Tour would be interested in taking home with them, whether that's the Doge's Palace, seen here, or San Marco Square, other major churches, of which there are many in Venice, and he would paint those typically with an open palazzo where he could fill it with people in the foreground, or the canal, as we see, full of gondolas. Now, what Canaletto's doing is he's also working out the composition very precisely. He's actually using something called golden section, which is a ratio of 1 to 1.618, and there's a long repeating number there, which helps our eye see more perfect ratios. We may not realize it, but our eye understands them and our brain sees them in nature all the time. I'll explain that in a second. So he's dividing his canvas up very precisely using, this is that ratio here, so A plus B is to A as A is to B. So that is why we see certain canvases divided up either horizontally or vertically, and why we don't see important parts, focal points of a painting directly in the middle, but we see them off to the upper quadrant or a side quadrant. To create one of these, all you would have to do is start with a square, divide it in half, cut one of those along the diagonal, and then draw a line down with your compass as you see here. And that's how you can create the rectangular shape that is also divided into golden section. So this is a way of dividing your canvas into major and minor parts. You can also develop that same rectangle and those quadrants, those sections, into what's called the golden spiral. So that shows you how these sectors are all connected. And they're connected this way in nature. And as you can see here, we see these things in nature all the time, which is why our eye looks to certain flowers and parts of the human body as being sort of having these perfect ratios. Now let's run back to the Canaletto painting for a second. So that's what's going on in the Canaletto painting, and how we can see he's using the horizon line and finding the tops of buildings, as well as what our eye is being drawn to in terms of the major and minor sectors. Now let's take a quick look at Ken Small, who is a retired gentleman, decided that he would forge a bunch of Canalettos. Here he is standing in front of his painting. Now, large scale, just like Canalettos are, very precise, just like Canalettos. He's got a good sense of the color and a very skilled hand for an amateur artist. Here's a painting that we're just looking at. Now, we may say that the foreground is a little too full of boats. He may have gotten a little carried away with the number of them. But what he doesn't do is really, I think, understand the mathematics behind the golden ratio as well as he should. I'll show you. So now you can see that the horizon line is off. It should be a little bit lower. He's also got this upper line of the segments too high up in the sky. It should be also lower. And that the curve of the spiral is not really ending in any place significant. And in fact, the boats, as we noticed before, the busyness of them shows that they're all just sort of equally spread out, rather than being corralled in certain areas, certain segments, as the Canaletto was. See, now we understand that this boat is alone in its sector. This one is crossing into another, and he's got a couple of boats off, disappearing off the side of the canvas, but they're actually touching certain parts of that spiral line, which is why we can tell the beauty of a Canaletto from the overcrowdedness of a Ken Small. And I'm surprised that people would be fooled by these, but believe me, it happened for years. So now we have another tool in our toolkit of how to determine what's a fake and a forgery if we're looking at work that is really precise and probably using some form of golden section to divide up the composition, that's something that we should be on the lookout for.